to the petitioner or its witnesses after the comment period. After hearing all of the testimony, the board members will discuss the application and the evidence as presented. Board members will ask a lot of questions, and there's good reason. We cannot grant anything we choose. There are rules to follow per our South Kingstown ordinance, so you must give testimony to support certain facts to allow the request to be approved. Tonight we have only dimensional variances. For a dimensional variance, you must present evidence that your hardship is due to the unique characteristics of the subject land or structure. It is not due to the general characteristics of the surrounding area. Your hardship is not the result of any prior action on your part, and granting the variance will not alter the general character of the surrounding area. Your hardship by the denial of the variance will amount to more than a mere inconvenience, and that means the relief sought is minimal for the reasonable enjoyment of the permitted use the property is proposed to be devoted. And with that, we'll move to the agenda. And the first item on the agenda is a petition of Amy Fratantonio. Fratantonio? Fratantonio, okay. Okay. 94 Michaela Court, West Kingston, Rhode Island, for a dimensional variance under the zoning ordinance as follows. The applicant is seeking to install a 16 by 32 in-ground pool located 5 feet from the side yard property line. The required yard setback for a pool is 10 feet. Therefore, the applicant is requesting 5 feet. The lot size is 0.62 acres. A dimensional variance is required per the zoning ordinance section 503.3 for swimming pools and section 907 standards of relief. Owners of the property are Robert and Mary Fratantonio for premises located at 94 Michaela Court, South Kingstown, Assessors Map 21, Lot 60, and Zone R80. In addition to the application, we have several other documents that have been entered. The application was signed on September 12th. The owner authorization form signed and notarized on August 22nd, 2024. We have a photo collage, 4 pages, a site plan, 1 page, prepared by Avalon Design, OWTS plan, 1 page, prepared by Dupree Engineering and stamped by David A. Russo, P.E., dated October 19, 2016. And a 200-foot abutters list and radius map with legal notices and notarized affidavit of mailing. And with that, who is here for the application? Come on up. Please identify and spell your name for the record.
I've done this since college, which was quite a many years ago. Amy Fratantonio, AMY-FRATANTONIO.
Raise your right hand, please. In the testimony you're about to give, do you promise or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, you may proceed. Tell us a little bit about what you plan to do here.
All right, great, thank you. Yeah, so we, as you can see, are hoping to get the variance for the pool in the corner back right of our lot. We naively bought this home and big spacious backyard, thinking that we might be able to someday put a pool in the middle of it. And after meeting with Avalon Design and coming up with some plans for about 2 hours, I finally figured out that our leach field is directly in the middle of our yard. So from my understanding, to be set back from that leach field, this would be quite literally the only location that the pool could go. I did reach out to Dupree Engineering, Matt Sullivan, and his advisor, Superior J, who I guess David Russo is no longer there, to see what it would take to move said leach field, and that's just not an option either in terms of budget, and he had a list of sort of other things. So that sort of left us with just looking for that 5-foot variance as you mentioned, from the property line. As you could see from probably the other picture might be better, where we are trying to put the pool, there's, a row of arborvitae there that creates a nice boundary, and on the other side of that is open space for the neighborhood. So we have had we've spoken with all our neighbors, and everyone has wished us good luck. Many offered to come support me this evening. And so, we personally think that it wouldn't disrupt our neighbors or anything being the 5 feet from our property line instead of the required or typical 10.
So, a question, when you had your engineering study, did they recommend you be 25 feet from the septic? Or was that just a choice that you made?
That was the information that I was given from Avalon Design, that it needed to be set back 25 feet, the pool edge from the edge of the leach field.
Is there a restriction on that, Mr.?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's a DEM regulation. So Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management won't allow any closer than 25 feet for a pool to a leach field.
Okay, thank you. Other question I have is, it looks like there's some other room on the property based on the site plan. We're going to bring that up again. Maybe behind the garage. Yeah, behind the garage, which looks like a garage on one side. You have a garage on one side of that house, or no?
Yeah, on the
Okay.
left-hand side
Right.
is the garage and the living room. Yep.
Okay. So it looks like there's some room back there that would not require a variance, dimensional relief. Why did you necessarily choose the area you've chosen?
My understanding, if you go back to that next picture, is that it would still not give us the 25 feet. I think it's from it would then be an issue with where the actual septic tanks are,
Okay.
not the leach field.
So I guess what you're testifying to is that's the least relief necessary is where you've decided to place that pool. You place it anywhere else on the property, you'd need more relief?
From my understanding, yes, or we would have to relocate the septic tanks,
Okay.
which I haven't actually looked into what
Okay.
that entails
Okay.
legally or professionally.
Questions?
I did go out and look at the property, and I think the location that you're suggesting and proposing also gives you quite a bit more privacy back there as well, which I think is a factor.
And I think also privacy for our neighbors, because of that open space where we were putting it in the back right corner versus the back left. We do have a row of arborvitae on the back left, but it's definitely would be, pushed up right against our closer neighbor's house, kind of taking their privacy away as well.
Are your neighbors clued in?
Yes.
No issue?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
Questions?
On either side. Actually, like as I mentioned, I spoke to both of them, or a lot of them reached out once the letters went out, and everyone has no rejections.
Good.
Yeah.
Questions, board members? Nothing? Nothing? Anything else you wish to add?
I have 2.5-year-old twin boys, and it would be really, really nice to just walk out in the backyard
They'll be
next
enjoying
summer.
it for a long time. So
Yes.
will your neighbor kids.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So
Other-
I think the neighbors are for this because it will be for their enjoyment as
One
well.
other question. Is there any other pools in your neighborhood?
There are two of
Okay.
our neighbors. Yep, a neighbor across the street, and then a neighbor a few houses down.
So you won't be unique.
True.
Okay.
Well, we can do a little pool hopping.
Okay, thanks.
Just a quick question. How much does that area get a lot of sun?
It does.
All right, which is,
Gratefully, that was the
Having-
one, 'cause, we do not want the pool there.
no, I know. but
Whatsoever.
having-
However, the only real pro to it is it actually happens to be the strip that gets the
No,
most
I
sun
thought it was a great
in the
location.
yard.
We had 3 kids, we had a pool, and the pool season is short enough. If
Yeah.
it gets a lot of sun, it extends it. It's a good location. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you. You're welcome anytime. Great.
Is minimal, and I certainly have no issue. Say again? Anyone? Mr. Landry, you want to speak in favor or not?
I will say I have 6-year-old twins and have a pool. It's a very good amenity to have, so I encourage you.
Are they boys?
Boy to girl.
Anyone opposed to the application? Hearing none, the hearing's closed, and the board. Thank you, Ms. Hicks.
Turn that on and, okay. Okay, at a meeting held today, October 16th, regarding the petition of Amy Frat Antonio for an application to have a dimensional variance to install an in-ground pool in the backyard. Ms. Frat Antonio represented herself. There were no other people speaking either in support or in opposition to the request. And the chair read all of the materials that were entered into the record. So under findings of fact, the board finds that the hardship from which the applicant seeks relief is due to the unique characteristics of the subject land or structure and not to the general characteristics of the surrounding area, and is not due to a physical or economic disability of the applicant, excepting those physical disabilities addressed in section 45-24-3016 because of the leach field in the yard and the requirement that this pool be 25 feet away from the leach field. The board finds that the hardship is not the result of any prior action of the applicant. The board finds that the granting of the requested variance will not alter the general character of the surrounding area or impair the intent or purpose of the zoning ordinance or the comprehensive plan upon which the ordinance is based, because it's simply a request to move 5 feet closer to the edge of the property line. The board finds that the hardship suffered by the owner of the subject property, if the dimensional variance is not granted, amounts to more than a mere inconvenience, meaning that relief sought is minimal to a reasonable enjoyment of the permitted use to which the property is proposed to be devoted, because to move the septic system, the tanks, would be prohibitively expensive. So I recommend approval with no conditions.
Thank you, Ms. Hicks. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Elia. With that, Ms. Hicks?
Aye.
Mr. Elia? Aye. Mr. DuPont? Aye. Mr. McDonald? Aye. And the chairman, aye. Good luck.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Next on the agenda is the petition of 74 Main Street LLC, located 74 Main Street, Wakefield, for dimensional variance under the zoning ordinance as follows. The applicant is seeking to construct a 30 by 35 two-story accessory dwelling unit measuring 26.5 feet in height. The maximum accessory building height permitted is 15 feet. Therefore, 11.6 of relief is requested. The lot consists of 12,632 square feet, an area where 20,000 square feet is required to establish an ADU. Therefore, the applicant is seeking 7,368 square feet of relief. A dimensional variance is required under the zoning ordinance, section 401, Schedule of Dimensional Regulations, section 402D. the notes on the schedule of dimensional regulations in Section 907, Standards of Relief. The owner of the property is 74 Main Street LLC for premises located at the same address, Assessor's Map 57-1, Lot 78, and is zoned commercial. The applicant has also provided additional documentation. The application with narrative was signed and dated December 6, 2024. The owner authorization form was signed and notarized on August 23, 2024. Boundary and topographic survey, 1 page, prepared by Dupree Engineering, stamped by Matthew Insana, PLS, and dated May 21, 2024. There's a plot plan, 1 page, prepared also by Dupree Engineering, stamped by Matthew Insana, and dated September 10th, 2024. There are 6 pages of proposed architecturals with exhibits B through F, prepared by Keene Architecture. Proposed architecturals, 1 page, prepared by Keene Architecture, with a revision date of October 10, 2024. And we'll also admit the document that was given to us tonight, which is the revision. 200-foot abutters list and radius map, legal notices, and notarized affidavit of mailing. And with that, Mr. Landry, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Attorney Matthew Landry on behalf of the applicant, 74 Main Street LLC, and its principal, Lori Keene, who's here this evening. I'd like to just give a little bit of background and context, because I think this is probably an issue of first impression for both the town and certainly this board. It is an issue of first impression for many towns and boards as of many of the new legislative changes that came this year. I'm sure you've all been briefed on a number of those changes. My client, Ms. Keene, operates her architectural firm out of the existing structure, which is I believe, a Victorian style structure, if that's the right architectural term. Beautiful old home that's been on Main Street and been part of the streetscape for many, many years. Ms. Keene acquired that property and has restored the interior of it and intends to stay there for some time. Again, she operates her architectural firm out of the first floor, and there's an existing apartment dwelling unit on the second floor that's currently rented out. Ms. Keene approached the town some time ago about her intent for additional storage and an accessory structure on the property. It's about a 12 to 13,000 square foot lot. It's zoned CD, which is your commercial downtown district. And that's an interesting district because it allows a number of commercial uses as well as single family homes and mixed uses, and it's currently a mixed use. So there's some flexibility in terms of what you can do there, but her intent, as you can hear from her in a moment, is to maintain the character and the integrity of the existing home and enhance that from an architectural perspective by creating this accessory structure in the rear of the property that is appropriate in size and scale. But really the difficulty with doing that came with the element of an accessory dwelling unit to be incorporated into it. She thought that was an important element to add, not only because it's needed in the community, but also because the state's taken an initiative to make additional dwelling units and ADUs accessible to the communities that we live in. And to that end, this year there have been significant changes in the law that allow ADUs by right in certain instances. It actually requires towns to allow ADUs on lots that have at least 20,000 square feet or that are part of an attached or detached structure in certain instances. What's unique about that is it's really one of the first times that the state has mandated ADUs in communities. But unfortunately, not every town, South Kingstown included, has created regulations to address the new state mandates and how ADUs come about. I believe the town does have an accessory apartment ordinance that is applicable to residential districts and has some restrictions, but there was a question of whether or not that even still applies now under the new law and how it would apply to this lot. So, in short, it became a little bit difficult on how to package this application, I think, for better or worse. I think there were questions from planning, there were questions from zoning, and then I got involved after it was submitted to try to help Ms. Keene and try to provide some context and some guidance, I think, in my opinion, would benefit the board and the town and how we should proceed. This property is zone CD, so that allows land development projects, including multifamily households up to 12 units. I believe it's 12 units. By right, Ms. Keene could have, I believe it's 3 dwelling units on the property under the existing dimensional regulations. Could potentially ask for more units on the property under a unified development process or even a comp permit process, and that's certainly not our intent. The land development process, as you can imagine, is a much more labor-intensive review period, much more extensive review process and submission process. It can take much longer, and this is really a benign, fairly benign accessory structure. That's all we're talking about. One of the unique provisions under the new regulations for ADUs specifically prohibits the town from imposing any restrictive or overly restrictive dimensional regulations on ADUs. What does that mean? I guess it's up for interpretation, but it depends on when the town creates those regulations. It can't include any dimensional regulations that would preclude the development of ADUs, in short. But an important element that I think is relevant here is that if it's not part, the ADU is not part of a larger development process or land development project, it actually, the statute prohibits it from being reviewed as a minor land development project, major land development project, or even as a special use. So it's kind of, we fall into this box where she could proceed, Ms. Keene could proceed under a land development project by right under the existing regulations, but then for an ADU, the state almost says you can't do that. So we're kind of up against competing regulations here and trying to figure out how this project fits in. Respectfully, we think it's a benign project because it's really just an accessory structure, but then we run up against height limitations, feasibility limitations with how big it can be, how big an accessory structure can be, and the site limitations. So I just provide that to you because we kind of fell into this no man's land where there's no guidance, and it's not the town's fault that a lot of towns are suffering from that issue. But we have state regulations that allow them by right under certain circumstances. So the relief that we're asking for, the 20,000 square feet, is based on that state regulation. It's not in your local zoning ordinance, but the local regulations have to defer to the state. And I defer to the solicitor for any expansion on that. But so that's where the 20,000 square feet comes from in the application and why there's a request for relief under that. The height relief and the justification for that, Ms. Keene can speak to, essentially being limited to 15 feet in height for an accessory structure would inhibit the ability to use this for what its intended purpose is, as an ADU and also functional storage space, which is a real need for her business, and she can explain the types of things that she will use it for. But ironically, by right, under a land development project on this property, she could go up to 40 feet. So presumably she could build a second structure with 2 dwelling units and go up to 40 feet, which I'm not sure anyone really wants to see in this neighborhood, particularly because it also abuts a residential neighborhood. So this was packaged as a variance, one, because I think there's a lack of guidance in your local regulations, but the state does encourage and even promote ADUs now. But I think the regulations, the way they're written, almost prohibit my client from going through the land development process because of that prohibition in the state regulation. So I hope that makes sense. That's why we're here, how we got here. We also think that it's a much more streamlined review process by coming to this board and asking for the variance. And based on some of the testimony you'll hear from Ms. Keene, I believe it's justified, the variance, both because of the existing regulatory structure and because of the prohibitive nature of the existing accessory regulations and how that would really prohibit an ADU from being constructed here that may otherwise be allowed by right. So with your permission, Ms. Keene, if I could have you come up and introduce yourself.
Couple questions, if
course.
I may, just some clarification. There is in our ordinance a restriction on ground floor living in a commercial district. You want to address that?
Sure. So that's one of the, I guess, other caveats to this. This district allows single-family homes, so technically, Ms. Keene could move her office out and have that entire Victorian structure just be converted into a single-family residence by right. There's an R10 zoning district immediately to the rear of the property, and all those homes in that district would be allowed to have single-family homes with dwelling units on the first floor. So I think we're kind of in this gray area. We're asking for relief on that dwelling unit restriction because the underlying zoning technically allows it. You know, it allows single-family structures, which can be on the first floor. In an ADU situation, I think the town would have to define where ADUs can be located in a commercial district, whether that be on the first floor, the second floor, how the town thinks that would be appropriate. We think having an ADU, an accessory structure with a residential unit is appropriate in this location because it's off of Main Street. It's in the rear of the property that abuts the residential neighborhoods. So having a first floor commercial business may not look as appropriate or consistent in that portion of the property, if that makes sense. Whereas on Main Street, it certainly does. I think the intent was to have commercial businesses along Main Street on the first floor and then owner-occupied residences or non-owner-occupied residences on the second floor. That's pretty consistent with a lot of main streets. I think this is a unique situation because there's a side street that runs alongside of it where this ADU is being proposed. It may look a little bit off in terms of the character of the neighborhood, which, as you know, is one of the elements we need to satisfy by putting a commercial operation on a side street that's predominantly residential, having a commercial element there on the first floor. We think having that ADU on the first floor would be appropriate and keep and maintain the integrity of the character of the neighborhood, and then having non-presuming storage for the business on the second floor. I think that makes sense. Otherwise, you could have storage on the first floor and have not really an attractive facade, and then have an ADU upstairs. I'm not sure that would work the way it's designed. But that's the intent behind that relief, and I think that relief is needed, again, because of the lack of ADU regulations in town. I think the town, certainly through a legislative process, could decide whether or not an ADU is appropriate in the commercial district on the first floor. I think that's a legislative discussion. But in this case, respectfully, we think it's justified because it's keeping and maintaining with that residential neighborhood feel and the size and the scale, and not having a commercial business on the first floor there.
If I could add, we didn't advertise, because I conferred with Jamie about this application before it was advertised. It has not been advertised as requiring relief from that provision prohibiting dwelling units on the first floor, because exactly as Attorney Landry explained, we advertised this and it's before you tonight for review, but the application doesn't match what we have on the books in our zoning ordinance, precisely because I don't know if any town has yet enacted regulations that reflect the new law that was enacted effective June 25th, I think. So I did review this application and how it was advertised, and I do think the relief that's been advertised is all the relief that's required for it. That being said, I do agree there's other potential paths to get an accessory dwelling unit here on this site if necessary. So I think if the board has any hesitation, that's something for them to consider. Just also so the board has some clarity, and I think this might be a question for Jamie or Attorney Landry, but I don't think an accessory, under the ordinance that we have on the books, accessory apartments, which has now been, in my opinion, superseded by the state law, I don't think an accessory apartment would be allowed on this lot.
I believe believe the 503 of the ordinance only allows it in a residential zoning district. I think that's,
So I think it's important for the board to know that this application is before you because the law is, the effect of the law is really broadening the properties that can support an ADU that have to, or that we have to by right allow an ADU. And the three paths for an ADU are, one is not at issue here for where the ADU is restricted for occupancy by a disabled family member. The other two paths are where the ADU is proposed to be located in an existing structure. Here, they're proposing to construct a new structure, so the only path in the law that the law lays out is the lot has to be 20,000 square feet or more. Because this lot doesn't have that minimum area specified in the statute, again, it's not in our ordinance yet because we haven't gotten there, but it's my opinion and advice that we can process this as if that lot area minimum is on our books locally. I think some other towns might have said, we don't have an avenue for relief yet, but I think it makes sense. Consider the application tonight, consider the two areas of relief that are needed, the height and the lot area. And if the board can't get over those hoops, I think maybe the applicant can consider whether there's another way to skin the cat.
Thank you, Amy. My concern is that straightforward dimensional relief, it doesn't look like a big deal here, but I want to be sure that we cover the ADU issue and that we address it as it should be addressed, because I agree with Attorney Landry and with you. It's confusing. You've got the state regulations on top. We don't have a ordinance in place on the bottom, but I want to be sure that we consider that before we just say, go ahead, because this could have some impact down the road on a number of properties in the town. So,
And I appreciate it. Just, I guess, one point to note too, the dimensional regulations have that provision about no first floor dwelling units, but it may only be applicable to a principal structure on Main Street, not necessarily accessory structures. And I think, again, that's partly the need for the ADU clarification. It's a legal question, certainly, but we asked for that relief out of an abundance of caution because there's no guidance in the ordinance. But, I do think, we can proceed because the state allows ADUs by right under those provisions. So even though the local ordinance is lacking, it's subject to that state regulation as if it existed in your regulations. Then it'll be up to the town to expand that and create the parameters moving forward.
Okay, and it was just pointed out to me, even though it's not described in the narrative description of the application on the agenda, that requested relief is noted in the ordinance 402.d. So you can consider the request for relief of the first floor dwelling unit prohibition. It is on the agenda. You can consider it and grant it if the applicant is requesting that.
Yeah, and again, out of an abundance of caution, because it's a provision in your ordinance, we wanted to I like to be belts and suspenders, as my father likes to put it.
So Ms. Goins, you mentioned the disability aspect. Is this intended for use by disabled person?
There's no proposal to make this restricted in any way for that use. It's a straight ADU. That would be a typical market rate unit. She's got Ms. Keene has an existing apartment dwelling unit that rents probably well below what she could get for market, and this would be an added bonus to the town and the neighborhood to have an additional unit somewhere in that range. But there's no proposal for that particular use.
Okay. All right, let's hear from Ms. Keene.
Sure, of course. Ms. Keene, may I just have to swear you in. You may have to swear you in.
Oh, sure. Good evening.
Good evening. Would you state your name and spell it, please?
Laurie Keene, Laurie, Keene, Keene.
Thank you. Raise your right hand. Testimony about to give. You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you. You may proceed, Mr. Landry.
Thank you. Ms. Keene, if you may, just could you provide the board with just some details about your background and your work experience?
Yes, I am an architect in town in Wakefield. I got the property back in 2020. It was previously in law office, as many of you know, and I've tried to kind of restore it to its former glory back when it was probably built. It's an important structure to me. As an architect, I fell in love with it and am thrilled with the way it looks. And now I'm before you today because part of the ADU or accessory structure and this height relief and everything that goes along with it, that's more of his purview, is that I'm very intent on having the structure defer to the main structure as the beautiful historical building that it is, and that 15-foot height really makes it very difficult, which I can get into more. But I kind of went off on you, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So with respect to the existing structure, can you just describe how it's used today and how is it used today?
Yes, the first floor is our architecture office. I'm one of 4. Joe here is another one that works there as well as 2 others. And we have client meetings and kind of use that first floor space for our office. Then on the second floor, there's a 1-bedroom, and I have a grad student from URI that has rented it. He's wonderful. I love him.
All right. So in terms of space, is storage a necessary evil that you're looking to resolve?
Yes, this was actually how kind of this all started, was that I really was looking for a space for some additional storage for, it's like architectural samples of roofing tiles that we need to store. It's the books, it's all the pieces of trim, and we're just getting so overcrowded in our office that I had to put it somewhere else. And so that was part of what started the need for the second building to be able to store these items in it.
And Ms. Keene, are some of those items building materials?
Yes, actually, this was something we had spoken about earlier today, that it's not that often, but when the opportunity does arise, that I do work with a number of different clients, and sometimes there's renovations going on, sometimes there's demo and rebuild, and there's the old doors, the doorknobs, there's some building materials that I would love to be able to kind of rescue and keep and reuse if possible, and this would allow me a space to store it.
Is height an important aspect of that storage space?
Yes.
And some of these items are
Yes, to be
large.
able, the long pieces of trim or the doors, old windows, stuff like that.
So in other words, you've kind of outgrown the space that you have to store in your existing.
Yeah, the not pretty. I can't put a bunch of doors in my office. You know what I mean? That's where I was running into trouble.
Okay. Ms. Keene, during this process, did you consider all other options available to you on the property?
Yes.
Okay. Can you please just describe what your thought process is behind creating an accessory structure as opposed to a whole other dwelling structure?
So, yes, there's multiple. It's really the neighborhood. It abuts, honestly, it abuts a residential neighborhood. There's a lot of 1.5-story homes. There's a lot of slightly smaller than that, slightly larger than that. I'm on the corner of Caswell and Hazard, and to put, to max that out with another multifamily house feels just not right for the space. It exceeds what I do intend and want to have happen. It just feels like an overdeveloped area because of what it's abutting. It just is that neighborhood. It's quaint, it's cute. It's a highly rentable area, but there are families. There's no reason necessarily that I don't feel like there's any reason I should be trying to max it out and going down the path of however many units I could really max it out as.
Is it your understanding that by right you could go up to 40 feet if
Yes.
this was not an accessory structure?
Yes.
Okay, and it's not your intent to do that?
No.
Okay, is it your intent to preserve and respect the integrity of the surrounding neighborhood?
Yes.
Okay, and in terms of the proposed height for this accessory structure, can you just briefly describe for the board why that's important in terms of architectural design and scale with the existing building?
Yes. So we're up against the idea that I want to maintain this beautiful historic structure that exists there, that I love, and create a building that is more of in a carriage house style, something that definitely defers to the main house and doesn't supersede it. It is like an accessory structure. I do want it to work into the neighborhood. I just think that's an important aspect of the overall, obviously the town does as well, but just the full area of it. And then I'm also up against the fact that that house does exist, this 1878, 1887. And if I weren't to match those roof lines, which are more characteristic of steeper pitches, it would really feel like a deviation. And as the architect that inhabits the building, that is trying to encourage additional residential work that I love to do, to have me design a building that just really doesn't capture the essence of what a true carriage house would do feels not right for my soul part of the design aspect to it. And that's really where I am kind of hung up on the fact that I do love this main house so much that I want that to be the kind of shining star and the secondary accessory structure. I don't want to max out and put an equally sized building in the back of it, essentially as if it was two properties, if you will.
So the existing structure, do you know how high that existing structure is?
It's about 32 to 33 feet.
Okay, does the height of that structure impose some restrictions or difficulties in the overall design for the accessory structure?
Well, I wouldn't want to come too close to meeting that height, but I also don't want to go too far away from that height. So I'm trying to get this happy medium, which is part of the reason, or one of the main reasons why we're here before you, is for that relief.
If you were restricted to just 15 feet for an accessory structure, would that impair or actually work against the whole architectural design?
Yes, and I've explored a few different options in my free time here, trying to maintain a lower, more horizontal, lower pitch. If you imagine a ranch where I could maybe put two together, make it look good and still defer. The footprint becomes so large in order to kind of house everything that I want between the, dwelling unit and the storage space. So it becomes such a bigger land disruption that it feels like it was starting to offset it, and I wasn't happy with the design. I didn't like how much space it took up on the property, and it didn't look as good as I think that it could, which obviously is important to me.
So Ms. Keene, a shorter building, in your opinion, would also create a larger footprint, correct?
Yes.
And in your opinion, would that design have more of an impact on the neighborhood character?
Yes, I think it would just almost fill up that block so much. And like I said, I'd prefer to keep that corner, so I've set it off the property line, and this property is zoned with 0 setbacks, which is, you don't see that every day. So it could come right up against that corner and, max out, and like I said, height, 40 feet, max out property lines, going down a different path than, before you today. But like I said, that's not the goal that I'm trying to achieve for the property.
Yeah, Ms. Keene, is this the minimal amount of relief you need to realize your intent for this property?
Yes, I've tried to keep it as tight as possible. I've asked for slightly more, and since then I've brought it down a little bit, so that footprint really, instead of reflecting the 1,000 square feet that is part of the proposal, is 885 footprint, with about 440 for the storage space above it. Like I said, keeping it in the roof lines nice and tight and small. The height, I'm not going to stand here before you and not acknowledge the fact that it is farther away than not from the 15-foot requirement. Part of that reason is there's a culvert right on the southeast corner of the lot along Caswell Street that during heavy rain events overflows and just creates a giant puddle in back. So I'm trying to keep the foundation slab. Ideally it'd be a foot above that, but then I'd be asking for more relief. So I went down to 6 inches above it, so that any mechanicals that are down there don't ultimately get flooded as well, since it is on the back half of the property. And then typically, to be honest, we'd be throw 12-inch joists at it on the first floor and on the second floor, like that's going to add another 6 inches to it. So I've changed those building materials down to 2x10s to try to keep it as many inches as I can be down to not be before you asking for more than I need is where I'm at, yes.
So the culvert on the property, is that unique to your property? Do you know?
I don't know this on my property. It's like right on the corner to the neighboring property where the sidewalk ends. And they had the highway department down, I think my neighbors did last year to clean it out, which has helped a little bit, but it still definitely has overflows. And it hasn't rained since I submitted this application, so I don't have a photo of it, but I can tell you that yes, that's it. That it fills up like the whole street into a giant puddle if you like spin that Google map around back down. Yes, like this is the part that there's like a depression, which is a little hard to see here, but basically between the stop sign and maybe a few feet back from where we're looking at is like this depression in the street, and that's where everything pools right in there. You can even see the like debris on the left-hand side of the street, which is how far it extends out in that area. And I just, because where the building will be, I'm worried about it being so close to it that I'm going to invite, water coming into the basement, which is where the mechanicals will be. Kept that headroom as tight as possible, like 4.5 feet, so it can be accessible, but trying to just squeeze in every way possible while maintaining the desired shape of the building and volume and mass of it, because also it's really visible from all 4 sides, which is very unique and also is more challenging than one would think. Oftentimes you think, oh, the back or the sides or whatever. But in this case, it's clearly visible from Caswell, Hazard. When you drive down Hazard, so from Main Street, you see it coming down Hazard, but also driving through the 2 buildings on Main Street. And then, of course, there's like a vacant parking lot kind of in that photo that you also see it as. So I'm just really trying to do the main house justice, to be honest, is where I'm coming in on it.
Okay. So Ms. Keene, in your professional experience as an architect, does the proposed structure impair or harm the existing character of the surrounding
I
neighborhood?
love that question. I think it very much enhances it. What's actually another unique part you touched on earlier about this area is that it has 2, family residences across the street on Main Street. We've got residences, in the down Hazard, and then there's some commercial along Caswell up by Belmont, but along that street, particularly on my side of Caswell, there's mainly 1.5-story houses, a little bit more. Like I said, a couple of those are businesses down by the Belmont Plaza side of things. But I think maintaining that streetscape also is very important. And like instead of trying to come here and say I'm going to utilize that 0-foot setback, I'm trying to push it back, maintain the same inline, but also with massing as well, so that it has some character to that corner rather than what it is right now, which is like a sunken, low, dirty parking lot. So,
Ms. Keene, as part of your submission, you submitted some historical documents related to the house. Do you recall
yes.
that? Okay. Does the fact that this house has historical significance set it apart from other houses in the neighborhood?
Yes, I think it's, there he is, yes. It was built back in 1887. The builder took great pride in it. There's an article from the Narragansett Times in the application package that really goes into the detail, the materials they use, the local masons, and how proud everybody should be of their workmanship. And I will say, like during the painting that we had redone on the outside, you really can. It's true, like it's a testament to everything they did. Like anything that was done back then really continued to be in very good working repair. It was more any subsequent minor work that had happened was things that were failing. But in general, being able to kind of bring it back to that kind of original, close to that original photo was the goal.
Ms. Keene, does the historical significance or strike that, does the existing characteristics of this property in conjunction with the lack of direction for ADUs in this district impose a hardship?
Yes.
And just for the record, is the hardship you're suffering with this application a result of any prior action that you've taken?
No.
I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keene. What are you going to do with your roof runoff drainage situation? Obviously, you're going to have some, in a storm, you're going to have some runoff from the roof. What's your
Yes.
plan?
Great question. I had Depreet working on the drainage application for this, pending your approval, so that we are sure to meet every regulation that there is in terms of catching any of that runoff.
Well,
right now.
off the top of your head,
Oh.
what do you, how
What
do
are
you?
we thinking? Because of the grade of the property, we're trying to create kind of a more internal area for parking that would allow some of like any of the downspouts to be connected to like planting gardens or rain garden, but trying to keep more of that in the center of the property rather than shutting off to the sides. Because obviously we know the area in the back is already a problem. Plus you have to keep it on your property, but that is kind of the intention, to make sure that we're handling it all.
And you mentioned parking. Let me ask the building official, is there a requirement on parking for an ADU in this district? What would you advise on that?
The zoning ordinance requires just one per an ADU, one parking space. And I believe the new legislation also says that you can't require more than one. So I think that's in line what's currently on the books, just one.
So I notice on your drawing you have four, it looks like four, maybe five parking. Number 5 would be an additional parking spot for the ADU.
Yeah, yes.
Is that what your plan is? Would it be paved?
I was hoping it would be more like a pea stone gravel.
Okay. So do you have any issue that you can perceive at this juncture with water and sewer connections? Do you have any?
I know where the connection points are. In the front of Main Street is the water, the sewer. Do we know off the top of our head? I don't recall. I can look at the site plan though.
So your testimony is you're not aware of where those connections are at this point?
If I had checked the site plan, I could remind myself where they are, but I'm pretty sure that the water is in the front, or is the sewer? I don't know off the top of my head. I apologize.
Okay. But you have city sewer there, I'm sure.
Yes, we do. Yep. Which we've never gone over.
What is the ceiling height on the first floor what's proposed to be residential?
8 feet.
8 feet ceiling height? And what is the ceiling height on the second floor storage area?
It starts in at about 5 or 6 foot knee walls and then would go up to a small flat in the roof line. So it'd be part of, built into the roof lines.
What would the highest point be?
Oh, 8 feet again.
So you got 8 feet on the first floor, 8 feet on the second floor, and you're asking for 26 feet,
Yes.
the height?
Yes.
Why? Make me know why, when you have an 8-foot ceiling on the first floor, 8-foot ceiling on the second floor, it's 16. You need to go another 10 feet.
No, totally understand. So the way the building height that I calculated it would be based on the average existing grade of about 50 feet of elevation. That's the elevation grade of flat ground, right? I have to be about 2 feet popped out of the ground in order to maintain my building slab and the foundation above the invert. Then I've got 10 inches of floor. Then I've got the 8 feet, 10 more inches of floor, and then the 8 feet and then the top of that is just the pitch of the roof line above it.
I'm not sure you're getting to 26 and a half feet, to be honest with you, but
So it's from average grade, which is, and it's not from the first floor, like we're taking it 3 feet below, or 3.5 feet really, below the level of the first floor, and then calculating the height from there.
so it's more about the design that you want the additional feet, is it not?
So it is definitely about the design. That is definitely a high point on it. I would point out, though, if we were restricted to the 15-foot height, I still would have to be above my invert height and then put that 15 feet on there. It actually would only allow a 6.5-foot plate height. So you actually couldn't even use it as storage, let alone living space. It doesn't
No, I understand.
qualify. So,
I understand. I'm just
Yes.
questioning the need for 26 and a half versus,
Yes.
versus maybe 20.
it is because the historical significance of the property and creating that visual.
Okay, so it's more visual.
There's definitely a visual part to it, and then, but in combination, if I just were to go wider and take that storage space, so say I chopped 5 feet off of this, right? That would
Well,
make,
why would you need to go wider? I mean, you've already got an established footprint. What we're talking about is height.
yes, because of the storage space upstairs. So if
Right.
I were to take 5 feet off the height of the building, then that storage space became not useful anymore, and then I'd need to move it to the first
Well,
floor.
First floor is going to be a residence, is that correct? You're going to
Yes.
rent that. Second floor is going to be storage.
Yes,
That's it.
yes,
So if you have 8-foot ceilings on the first floor, 8-foot ceilings on the second floor, that's 16 feet. I'll give you another 6 or 8 feet maybe, and that doesn't come up to 26. Well, I don't understand why you need that height.
Well, Ms. Keenan, part of the intent for the height relief had to do with the size and scale and respecting the scale of the existing structure, isn't that correct?
yes, I could show you.
Okay, so that's a visual thing. I mean, that to me is not the least relief necessary because you want to make it look like the existing building.
Well, I just want to remind you, I know you have the new template. Least relief necessary was written out of the statute. Yeah. Well, even that, minimum or least, that's not a consideration anymore. We just need to consider, right, whether it would be more than whether denial would amount to more than a mere inconvenience.
Quick question, is this, was the original intent for this to be a single or a multi-tenant structure?
So in the original plans, I had submitted it as two, just because I thought I was confused on the way the ADU was written and the relief, and admittedly, like, fully confused. I'd prefer it to be storage, to be perfectly honest. I was like happy to go back to it. It was what my original intent was. So it was a confusion on my part that I submitted it as a multi-unit. I need the storage.
Okay, so that will be storage, so there's no issue with future development.
I have no plans to use it as a future.
Okay, so there's no issues with parking because there'll be okay, that clarifies it. And I saw that on the revision. I was just wondering why the change.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask a technical question of our attorney. We advertised this application based on the way it was submitted as 2 residential units, and now there was an upstairs apartment and a downstairs apartment, and now just a couple of days before tonight's meeting, we get a revised plan with storage. Can we technically act on this if this is not what the abutters were noticed, et cetera, not what was advertised?
I think the key description of the application is that the fact is they're seeking permission to establish an ADU on the property. So I don't think the addition of storage space, to me, it's about what relief is required, what provides fair notice to the public on what the decision is, and it's about, can this applicant establish an ADU on the property and what relief is necessary. So I do think it's proper for the board to act on this. I think it was properly advertised.
I might be able to shed some light on that. So when the initial application did come in, I reviewed it, but briefly at a glance, it appeared to be 1 unit encompassing both stories. I drafted the legal notice stating that and including the square footage of both stories. But then it was pointed out to me that this is actually an over-under in 2 separate units. And then I brought it to the attention of the applicant that, this is, beyond what the board could grant, certainly. And so the notice should be accurate for, at least at the time, it was 1 unit, is how I read it.
So if we were to grant the dimensional variances that are requested in the application, and the applicant proceeds to get all the rest of the permits and go ahead, what's to prevent the applicant from, I don't want to do storage, I want to do another apartment upstairs?
The general principle and the rule that when the zoning board approves a variance, it's tied to the plans that are submitted, and that's the last version of the plans, not, the first iteration.
Right.
So the ADU would be approved at exactly the size and dimensions and, tied to the renderings, right? So that's what would prevent them from expanding it or changing it in any, I'll say, material way. Just the other thing I want to note, I think it was described, but maybe no one has said this explicitly. ADUs used to, both under state law and the accessory apartment regulation that we have on the books, it used to be that you could only establish an ADU basically on a single family, accessory to a single family residential. Right. That's no longer,
right.
That has been broadened, that rule has been effectively abolished with the new law. So I know there's, at least I've heard from folks in different communities, concern about where ADUs can go. That ship has sailed.
Mr. Chair, if it helps to, my client would have no objection to a condition that it's limited to 1 dwelling unit, the second floor limited to storage. We would have to come back regardless. That is certainly not her intent, but I just want to make it clear she's not opposed to a condition to that effect.
Yeah, I'm more, probably Amy or Jamie can help me out with this a little bit. She's asking for dimensional relief on 7,368 square feet, based on the fact that 20,000 square feet is required to establish an ADU. Is the 20,000 square feet from the previous regulation, or is that current now?
That's from the state law that was enacted this year and became effective in late June. So one way to establish an ADU has nothing to do with the size of your lot. And that's if you're on a small lot, but you want to establish an ADU within the footprint of an existing building, that is now allowed by right as long as it's on a lot where the principal use is residential. That's not what you have before you. This is the only way under state law to establish an ADU in a new structure is if you have sufficient lot size. Here, they're proposing an ADU in a new structure, but they don't have sufficient lot size. My advice, my interpretation of the law is that someone can seek dimensional relief for a lot size. I think we don't have any answers on this. I think some other towns have interpreted it differently. In other words, if you don't have 20,000 square feet of lot area, they might not send an application like this to the zoning board. I prefer to err on the side of caution where a state law has been enacted and we don't even have our regulation in place yet. So I think that's why they're here, because they don't have sufficient lot area to establish an ADU within a new structure. If they were seeking to just add an ADU within the existing building, maybe by decreasing the size of cutting the existing apartment in half, they could do that and no relief would be required.
So as far as what you're saying is, if it's a separate dwelling, not attached to the current dwelling that's there already, okay? then you're gonna go by that 20,000 square feet, and you would put, if it's less than that, say it's 15,000, you're gonna ask for 5,000 square foot relief on that? Okay, I got you. Thank you.
I guess I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. I still don't understand how it's 26 and a half feet. Even when I look at the rendering, I don't think it's that high. So are there any other calculations, or Jamie, have you looked at it? Is that the truth? Because when I look at the pitch of the roof, and I know when you're talking about the second floor is going to go up and it's just going to be squared off on the top, I just don't understand it.
Mr. McDonald, I'm sorry, I called you. Mr. Robbins. Express the board feel about that.
Again, it's not that I have an issue with it. I think you've done a lot, what you said, to reduce the relief, going from a smaller joist to the slab and all that. So and I like the character of this carriage house tied to an old Victorian. I think it fits well into the area. I'm just trying to understand, as a numbers person, how you came up with that. It's not that I'm not opposed to it.
I think the testimony supports that it's a visual thing. It's not going to affect storage or anything. It's a visual thing to make it look good and to match what's on the property. And is that enough? Is that enough to grant relief? That's up to us.
Just looking at the design that you have here, I think aesthetically, it's gonna make the building look nicer. And I think because the structure where her office is a huge dwelling. If it's too small, I think it's gonna look kind of strange. So to keep it in conformity maybe with the size of the dwelling in the front, with the nice roof pitches and stuff that she had, I think honestly it would look a lot better. The other might look more like a shed if it's too long.
I think it would be disproportional.
Yeah.
I have a visual, if you would like to see, just to maybe help, and also address that you're right, and I respect and understand, but the point is I am trying to maintain that street facade, not only to stay in line with the historic building, but to maintain or even increase a streetscape that almost exists on Caswell. This would really like bookend it, so that is part of the reason for the 1.5 story visual to kind of marry that full streetscape. Excuse me. I won't take too much of your time here. These two images are particularly.
Yeah. With your permission, may I? Thank you.
And this one, I don't know if I wanted to do both at the same time. So this is kind of looking at the idea that to maintain that 15-foot height, and get the same programming space. It's just an analysis, it's not anything more than that. To simply say, if I have 440 upstairs, roughly, 825 downstairs, that's 1,325, that's this footprint that I'm showing visually here. And the intention is just to say that that's kind of as far as I could get on it in terms of massing. And it does, like a shed. A large one, don't get me wrong, but it feels like a shed and disservice to it, which is why, for your consideration. I know this is just another kind of loophole. I'm sorry, incorrectly. This is part of that.
Jessica, you want to mark that for the record?
It would be applicant's exhibit G, I believe, because I think you went up to, I will be the next in line from what you presented.
Can I ask a question? In your drawing here, we see a 15-foot, is that just to show us what a 15-foot building would look like?
Yes.
As opposed to what you're proposing?
Yeah, if I did it, if I wanted to kind of, and not ask for any.
Yeah, what the two would look like next to each other. Okay. Okay, so in changing your request from an apartment on each level to an apartment with storage, you still want the same ultimate height for the building? You're not changing your request for height variance? Okay.
I am, thank you. Unless there's any questions, we're happy to provide some clarity, but that's all we have. Thank you. Just state your name.
Joseph Pastor, 380 Pond Street in Wakefield.
Spell your last name, please.
Pastor, P-A-S-T-O-R-E.
Raise your right hand. You swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony?
I do.
Okay, you may proceed.
I obviously know Ms. Keene. I know that she takes a lot of pride in keeping neighborhoods the way they're intended to feel and look. And I know that she has a certain example to uphold in doing so, seeing that she makes her livelihood on helping other people do the same thing in their neighborhoods. I know that this design is asking for a certain amount of relief. I know that that is the minimum amount of relief that she would be asking for to try to uphold that feel and look to accentuate or enhance the look of the neighborhood. And I, for one, am for keeping Wakefield looking the way it does and to feel the way it does, and I think that she's setting a good example in what other people might do in her footsteps if they're going to develop similar things in downtown Wakefield. So I'm for what she's trying to do there as part of the community.
Thank you. Any questions for this witness? Thank you. Spell your last name again for me.
Oh, yes. Pastor, P-A-S-T-O-R-E.
Pastor. Okay, thank you. Okay. You wanted to wrap it up? Final argument?
Well, I won't belabor the point. I think, we're in kind of a new area where the law is probably going to change tomorrow after we figure out what happens tonight. But, I think the ADU legislation was good. It had the intent of creating additional housing opportunities, obviously. And I think we're kind of in this middle ground where the regulations locally have not caught up to the state regulations, which is often the case. But I think in front of you, Ms. Keene did an excellent job, at least in my opinion, to respect the integrity and the character of the neighborhood, the existing Victorian structure. This is her business. This is her flagship office. And obviously, it's very important to her to respect the community. She's a part of this community. Maintain that character, as opposed to what would be allowed by right here. It would be much more obtrusive, go through a much more difficult, lengthy process. And this really was the minimal amount of relief that she needed to realize this purpose for the property, without any guidance or regulations really to follow through it. I think in the coming years or months, possibly there'll be a little bit more guidance, from the town on how to do these things. But I think this is a prime example of what ADUs were designed to do, have minimal impact, but enhance the community and provide much needed housing for the community, but also provide storage space for her business that she's already outgrowing the space that she's in. So respectfully, thank you for taking the testimony and your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Landry. Board members, what are we thinking here? You're good. Mr. McDonald?
You know, I really, a couple of comments, really. I appreciate the effort that was made to minimize the relief and really what could be on that property versus what is being proposed and how it's in harmony with this very historic Victorian house. And I definitely think it will definitely, enhance the area, not only on that part of Main Street, but I think throughout the entire downtown. And when I look at, Wakefield, and I know when you talk to a lot of people, it's really the downtown of Wakefield that really draws a lot of people. And I think this would be a great asset for them.
Thank you. Ms. Hicks?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot to add. I just think that because we have new state regulations that are not supported by new town ordinances, we're sitting here in that gray area that you talked about. And from my point of view, we want to do what we need to do correctly, as opposed to perhaps sounding like we were a somewhat hostile group, sitting here with the questions that we asked. But it's just to make sure that we do it correctly, and then you do it correctly. So.
Thank you, Ms. Hicks. Mr. DuPont, you have anything? You're good? All right. With that said, we'll close the hearing. Does somebody want to make a motion? Mr. Ilya?
No, you go.
All right.
You want me to do it again? Or?
You want to do it? You okay with it? Okay.
Okay. So,
Amy, you're probably going to need to weigh in on this one because we want to make sure we cover the
yeah.
ADU testimony. Okay.
Okay, again, at our meeting of October 16th regarding the petition of, I want to make sure I get your name right, Lori Keene, to build a new structure on her property at 74 Main Street to be used as both an ADU and as storage space. We heard from Lori Keene, the applicant, and also from Joseph Pastor, an associate. Is that correct? Do you work together? Okay. Okay. And we didn't hear anyone else in the audience speak either in support or in opposition to the application. The materials that were entered into the record have all been previously stated by our chair. So the board finds that the hardship from which the applicant seeks relief is due to the unique characteristic of the subject land or structure and not to the general characteristics of the surrounding area, and is not due to a physical or economic disability of the applicant, accepting those physical disabilities addressed in 45, 24, 30, 16, because in order to construct this ADU, this new structure, relief is necessary because the lot does not contain the required 20,000 square feet, and also there is a height restriction that also needs a variance. The board finds that the hardship is not the result of any prior action of the applicant, because again, this is a new structure on an existing lot. The board finds that the granting of the requested variance will not alter the general character of the surrounding area or impair the intent or purpose of the zoning ordinance or the comprehensive plan upon which the ordinance is based. The board finds that the hardship suffered by the owner of the subject property, if the dimensional variance is not granted, amounts to more than a mere inconvenience, meaning that relief sought is minimal to a reasonable enjoyment of the permitted use to which the property is proposed to be devoted, because as we saw in the drawings, that height variance really does allows for the construction of a building in proportion to the existing home. Anything shorter in height would not be architecturally pleasing to the eye. So I make a motion that we approve it. And as far as conditions go, this is where I'm going to ask the attorney, anything we need to include under a condition?
I think if you want to explicitly state anything, condition regarding the layout, the condition that was suggested by Attorney Landry, you can, right? Condition that
that the upper unit be used only for storage?
Yeah, that's fine.
You can add that.
Yeah, I would like to add that the, the upper floor only be used for storage.
That's fine. That motion was articulated well. I just want to point out one thing so we're all on the same page while we're here tonight. The ADU law says towns can't require more than one off-street parking space per bedroom. So normally for a 2-bedroom ADU, you would need 2 parking spaces, but because this is in the commercial downtown zone where parking requirements are reduced by 50%, one off-street space is all they need, even though this is a 2-bedroom ADU.
Okay, does that need to go into the motion, or is that
No,
just
that's just for
informational?
clarification.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Hicks. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Ilya. Ms. Hicks?
Aye.
Mr. Ilya?
Aye.
Mr. McDonald?
Aye.
And Mr. Dupont? Aye. Chairman, aye. Congratulations. Approval of the minutes of, date me. September 18th. Anyone have any corrections or additions or changes to those minutes? All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. The minutes are approved. What else? Amy, do you have anything for us this evening?
No, the planning board is going to be reviewing, is going to be reviewing draft amendments to the code reflecting this year's round of new legislation. It won't hit the town council's desk, I'm going to say, until at least December. I have not forgotten about the letter I'm drafting for this board regarding the request to not enact the combined review board, so I haven't forgotten about that.
I'm sure you haven't. Mr. Gorman, you have anything for us?
Nothing new to report. I was just telling Amy, though, that the deadline for filing for November's zoning board hearing, there's a similar application where, just a heads up that they don't meet the land area, and it's by like a very small square footage to establish an ADU, so they'll be
It's an
before the
ADU?
board. Correct. For similar. but,
Residential or what district? What kind of a district?
I think it's R10 residential.
Okay.
But we're seeing a lot of applications for ADUs. I think we received, in the last 30 days, the building department has received 5 applications.
Wow.
So,
Here we go.
yeah.
All right, motion to
Wait,
adjourn. Go ahead,
Amy,
Ms. Hicks.
Amy, who writes those new ordinances that we don't have yet? Do you write them? Does the council write them? Does the council's attorney write?
That's classified information. No, in all seriousness, it's a collaborative process that the workload is shared between legal counsel, planning department staff, and the state last year and this year through Rhode Island Housing, some grant money, established what was called the Municipal Technical Assistance Program. Part of that was hiring experts to create template ordinances, because especially with last year's housing package where the process was so drastically changed, there was a need for, and with a compressed time frame, the new laws, were enacted in June, effective in January. So the state did us a small favor in making template ordinances available. But yeah, it's a collaborative process, and ultimately staff weighs in on it. So whether it's reviewed by me or drafted by our office, many hands go into drafting it. The planning board obviously has quite a hand in reviewing and shaping and revising the draft ordinances. The zoning board doesn't have a statute, even though you enforce and administer the zoning ordinance, The planning board is the board that's charged with making recommendations to the council on the content of the ordinance.
When the
Yeah.
ordinance is going
Yep.
go in effect, so that would be the time that if the zoning board wanted to give kind of their 2
Yep.
cents worth, that they could go to the public hearing and.
Yes, you can certainly send your comments to the planning board when it hits their agenda. They usually review draft ordinances at work session meetings. But the public hearing, the advertised public hearing will be before the town council, date TBD. It could be in January.